now.
Hi everyone, Ravi here.
Hi, this is Nikhil, and welcome
And
back to the channel. So, Ravi, why don't you tell everyone what we're going to talk about today?
yes, and this is a second video. And so today we are going to talk about Bheeshma Pratigya. So what I told was in Hindi or in Sanskrit. You can interpret that in English. It's about an oath, a promise, a vow, which was taken by one of the characters in Mahabharata. So we are going to talk about the character, his vow, what was the backstory, and what was the impact that had throughout his life and the life of people around him, and also what happened in society because of that vow. Because he was a pretty influential person. So when someone like that takes a decision early on in his life, uh, then how does it impact and affect other things? So to give an introduction, in ancient India, there was a king known as Shantanu, and he fell in love with the human embodiment or the deity Ganga. So Ganga is a river, one of the largest rivers in India, and so it was also seen as a goddess, like a human form. You can say like anthropomorphic or personification. So just imagine like the river, Lady River is a lady, and so they were in love, and so they had a child, and the child was called Devavrat, and the interesting thing about Shantanu is that I wouldn't say he was kind of a womanizer. So later on in his life, so after giving birth to Devavrat, Ganga went her way, and so Shantanu, the king, was left with the son, crown prince. Um, so later on in his life, Shantanu again fell for a fisherwoman. She was a common lady. She was not royalty, so he fell for her. But the father of the fisher lady, the fisherwoman, uh, did not agree to this arrangement or affair or this relationship between the king. Um, he would only agree if the offspring of Shantanu and the fisherwoman um, would inherit the kingdom and would be king and would succeed Shantanu ahead of Devavrat, his firstborn son. Um, so Devavrat loved his father very much. He admired his father. His father was like a role model to him. So after hearing this condition of precondition from the fisherwoman's father, the king Shantanu was heartbroken. He was sad. Even though he fell for her, he didn't want to do any injustice to his son. But then the son had a different perspective. His love for father was greater than his desire to succeed on the throne. So he went to the father and made a deal. He said that he wants his father to see happy, and so he wants the marriage or the wedding to go ahead. And then he made a vow. He made a vow that's called a Bhishma Pratigya. So what he did was he vowed celibacy throughout his life. He said he will not marry. He will not uh, find love or be with a woman, or he will be a celibate, lifelong celibate. And that was a big deal for royalty, somebody from the royal dynasty at that point of time. So he did that. And he went a step ahead. He said that whoever sits on the throne of Hastinapur, that was a kingdom his father managed and ruled, whoever sits on that throne, he will see a shadow or a reflection of his father in that ruler, and he will always be loyal to that throne. No matter what, he will be loyal to that throne, and he will be loyal to whoever is the king at that particular time, and he will be their supporter, he will be their advisor, he will be their right hand man. He will do anything that takes to keep them in power. He is loyal to, so his loyalty is bound to the throne. So he made these two vows. So now the fisherwoman's father agreed to it, agreed to the marriage, and so Bhishma did this pratigya or this vow or promise without even consulting or consent from his father, the king. But he had already given his word. He was a man of his word. So this is called Bhishma pratigya. And what follows was how this promise or vow or kept or affected Bhishma and those around him, and even country India throughout the story.
Okay, that was a great way to start off this discussion, I guess. Um, and I think the question here is, well, I guess let's start at the top. Like, generally, what do you think about making a vow at such a young age that would basically impact the rest of your life? So you basically made a choice about the rest of your life when you were still very young. Uh, what do you think about that?
Yeah, from Bhishma's perspective, so that's why he was called Bhishma. His name was Devavrat because of that terrible oath he took. He became known as Bhishma. Bhishma is the meaning of Bhishma is one who took a terrible oath, one of the terrible oath. So, um, but the interesting thing, there was a upside to it. I wouldn't say upside. So because he did this, he took this oath. His father gave him a boon that since you have sacrificed your inheritance to the throne, since you have thrown away your life now for me, I would give you a boon. You would only die at a time of your choosing. Nobody can kill you if it's not your wish to die. So it's called Ichha Mrityu Vardhan. You can see in two ways. A life like that would be a life of suffering and all that. But again, he can die whenever the man can die when he chooses. So that's kind of a good deal for him. But later on, that would also come back to haunt him. And so okay, so to come back to your question about what do I think about it, uh, if I was at that age, any age, like I wouldn't do that. But I can't speak for Bhishma why he did it. There are some motivations, but he loved his father. He was short-sighted in that sense, so he made a terrible vow, but that would affect the rest of his life. If he was a commoner, that would affect only his life. But he was royalty. He was one of the most crown prince of the country, so it's going to affect a larger part of the society what he did. And so we can talk about incidences from his life after that vow, how it affected and how it blinded him to various other things. But to ask me, I wouldn't take that terrible vow because things change in life. Things change in life all the time, so you cannot take a oath. Something I'm reminded of what Jaime Lannister did in Game of Thrones. It's quite a nice parallel, right? People choose honor, like I'm going to be a man of my word, I'm going to be a person of my word, but sometimes circumstances make you want to break that oath, right? Because there might be something bigger. You have to see further than your oath or your honor or your what you gave your word to something. So these are my thoughts, like initial thoughts. We will talk more about it. I didn't think that was a good choice from Bhishma. Um, Again, he did, but he should not have kept his vow. There were so many things that happened. He could have broken that. Yeah.
Well, so from my perspective, I think he chose to make the vow from a good place. Like he did it to make his father happy. He didn't like seeing his father so sad. So I think his intentions were good to start with. But as I said, like any decision that anyone makes in their life is going to affect someone else in a bad way. Like not necessarily just the people around you, it's going to affect someone else somewhere in a bad way. So if for someone to win, someone has to lose. I guess that's what I'm getting at. And so I don't know, like how responsible can you hold Bhishma for whatever pain and suffering it would have caused people generations later when he didn't even know these people. They weren't even alive or even born, because all he thought about was that one person that he really loved and really respected, and he just wanted to make that person happy. So from his perspective, I think he did the right thing at that time, and he got a really, really bad life out of it. I guess he paid for it by living a life of of just pain. Like he basically gets to see everyone around him die, except him, because he was practically immortal because of that, the boon, so-called boon, but it's rather a curse for him, where he can choose where to die or when to die, but that doesn't mean he could not feel any pain or any suffering. Like, he still had to suffer and live through pain and everything for all those years, for however generations that he lived through, uh, because of that one choice or selfless choice that he made. So basically, he made a really, really selfless choice and lived a life of suffering, and also caused a whole lot of suffering for a lot of people. So, does that make him a bad person? That's what I'm asking. Like,
Uh,
because his intentions were pure, but the outcomes were bad, does that make him a bad person?
uh, he did one bad thing, in my opinion, not far from, not further from what he when he took that vow. So, so what he did is like, so he had a half brother from the his stepmom um, was the fisherwoman, right? And then so Shantanu and the fisherwoman had two sons, and so he had his half brother. So the half brother was going to be king. So now he had to find a suitable bride for the half brother. So what he did is that, so he was from the warrior class. So he basically kidnapped three women, um, Ambika, and Ambalika, I think so, because he said that he wanted to have them as. So he wanted to kidnap them actually, so that they could be potential bride for his half brother. And so two of them readily agreed, but there was Amba. She was already in love with some other person, and that person was defeated in combat by Bheeshma like a few years back. Okay, so Bheeshma didn't know that. He thought these girls were single, and these girls would make great match. Of course, he did kidnap them. That was awful, but you can contextualize now from the morality and ethics from thousands of years ago. But it was a bad thing from today's perspective, even from their perspective at that point of time. But he had a narrow perspective to get his half brother married or hitched, so that the progeny and he can continue his line. So okay, so when he came to know that like this girl already had a boyfriend, or he snapped it. Okay, I'll send you back. Go back to your boyfriend. So she goes back, and the boyfriend refuses to have her back. He says like, no, he took you. Now I can't take you back. So she was now between a rock and a hard place. She was kidnapped. It was kind of a dishonorable thing for her. Of course, it is. And now she can't go back to her boyfriend because he basically dumped her. So he came back. She came back to Bhishma and said, "You marry me. You are the one who kidnapped me. You are the one I had a breakup now with my boyfriend or my lover. Now you have to marry me because my honor is at stake." Um, he said, "No, no, no, lady. I can find you other people, but I can't marry you because I'm vowed that celibacy. I can't do it." She got pissed off. So her life was basically destroyed, right? I mean, so in ancient India, there was a tradition like if a married woman is touched by another man or something, even forcefully, like it's a regressive thing, but anyway, like you have to marry me, kind of thing. You have seen me naked, or you have touched me, so now you have to marry me. So anyway, so she was sad, so she wanted justice. She went to Bhishma's guru or teacher Parashurama, and then complained to him, whined to him, like, look at this guy, what he did. So Parashurama got angry. He was a very angry person. He was short tempered. So he came and challenged Bhishma to a fight. So they fought for 23 days and it ended in a stalemate. So the girl still didn't get a justice. So that was the first life he affected. That would come back and bite him in the ass later on, because she would be the one in the next reincarnation. Of course, we are talking fiction now. Like anyway, it's a story. So let's go play with that. She would reincarnate as Shikandi. So she would reincarnate as a man, or like a I don't know if it's LGBTQ community, like identity from that. Like he was, I think, a transsexual. I'm not sure.
Well, based on the stories I've heard, like, she basically was reborn as a man, basically a man, but he
Yeah,
would remember his past life, that is the life of Amba,
Amba. Yeah.
so that he would be able to get his revenge on Bhishma.
Oh, yeah. So he was a man. So okay. So that was the first life he affected. But anyway, that came back to haunt him. But he did affect that young lady's life in that way. So that's the first incident. What do you think about it?
Well, if you're expecting me to justify kidnapping, I'm not going to do that. But yeah, I mean, he, I guess he had one goal and he doesn't think about the way the goal is achieved. Um, I think it's also I think that's a pattern. He had one goal at first to make his father happy, and he did whatever had to be done to make reach that goal. And again, this time he just wanted to get his stepbrother married, so he just did whatever he had to do. Just he went and kidnapped whoever he could find. Um, so again, so
I'm not sure about this, but I think one version of the story is like first he went formally and asked for their hand to the girl's father, but then he didn't agree or he insulted Bhishma or the kingdom, so he got pissed off. So now I'm gonna kidnap them because you are not treating me well. Anyway, it doesn't justify anything he did.
exactly, yeah.
So yeah,
So yeah, so this is, I guess the bigger picture here is, does the end justify the means in this case? And
no,
no, I guess
yeah.
the end doesn't justify the means. Um, but does it make him a bad person?
Um, he was personally. It's again subjective thing to call somebody good or bad. Yes, he did a bad thing. He did a bad act. So that act was awful. So you have to see the totality in a person's life. For example, he might have done 50 good things and 25 bad things. He must be held accountable to those 25 things. He must be punished. He must face the consequences and all that. But again, you have to see the totality of a person, right? So I might get some stick for saying this, but we are very soon. People these days like quickly are quick to brand someone good or bad, but there is it's you have to. It's like a math. Like you have to keep account of the good things, the bad things that people do, and I don't think exists someone who did everything good and not even inadvertently or affect someone. Or yeah, there is good and bad in everything. So that particular case, yes, he was in the wrong, and so he does get punished for that. He gets killed by the same person. He spoiled her life, so she comes back as a man and kills him. So he got his justice. She gets her justice in that sense. So there is one more incident, like not another incident. There's so many incidents through Bhishma's life. Um,
Well, because he
he
lived for, I guess, 5 generations,
five
because he
generations
was
exactly.
immortal. Yeah,
Exactly. And he was the greatest warrior in India. People say Arjuna was greatest archer, but this guy was undefeated in combat, and so he was the greatest general. And so the second incident that I recall is, so he could have prevented the war between the cousins we talked about last week, Pandavas and Kauravas. We talked about the game of dice in which the five brothers lose their kingdom and their wife. He was watching all that in the courtroom. He was witnessing a game of dice and the betting of a kingdom, betting of a lady, the disrobing of a lady. So he was bearing witness to that. He was witness to that. And he didn't do anything to stop it because he was loyal to the throne. And the throne's son, the king's, the blind king Dhritarashtra's son was orchestrating this. So he had to turn a blind eye. There was just injustice going on, and there was even, I would say, crime going on in that courtroom. He could have stopped it. He didn't. He had every authority to do it, but he was blinded by his vow and his oath that he didn't do anything to stop it, and that cost millions of lives. If I were to believe what's written in the books, we are just talking stories, right? Thousands of lives, we can say that in the war.
wow.
What do you think about that?
True. So I guess this is going back to that question of how he made a choice and then basically he lived with a choice, and or basically he had several opportunities to break his oath, but he chose not to. And I mean, I can see it in both ways. Like, there's the perspective that he saw something bad happen and did not do anything to stop it because of his oath. But you can also say that he made an oath and he was the type of person who would keep his oath no matter what. So he's a man of his word, which is generally seen as a very good quality. But he's also the person who let bad things happen in front of his eyes, which is not a good quality. So I guess that's the conflict of that character basically. So I think that just because of that oath that he took, the vow he took to always remain loyal to the throne and to be celibate and like not ever claim for the throne. So that decision that he made was from a good place. So that was the good in him making the choice. But then there's also the bad side of him, which would stick to that oath no matter what happens, irrespective of whatever injustice is happening in front of him. He would always fall back on his oath and stand by his oath. So that makes him that morally gray character. Like, you can, like, his choices can be twisted as both good and bad depending on the lens that you're viewing it from. So obviously I agree with you whatever you said. He made bad choices, but he also made choices out of very good intentions like out of love and respect and loyalty for specific people. And so this goes back to your what you brought up earlier about people making good acts and bad acts, and how we are very quick to judge people as good or bad, like straight away, depending on either one or two things that they do. And I think you mentioned these days, but I don't think it's these days. I think that's just how humanity does things forever. Just because you look at any history book, people are either completely good or completely bad. And the good people are always the people who won the wars, coincidentally. So, yeah, so I guess that's just the way we like our people. Very simple. It's we like our stories and our heroes and our villains to be black or white, where the hero is always good and everything they do is good, and a villain is always bad and everything they do is bad. But I think,
I have a question for
yeah,
you. So you kind of like equated like from different perspectives, but does personal honor supersede the greater good? Like, okay, if you keep your vow, keep your oath, you are an honorable man, you keep your honor, you are a man of your word, but against the greater good, like what happened? So why can't someone just break their vow and oath or promise and then do something for the greater good? Because there is an example in the same story of someone who does it. So it's kind of, the Mahabharata is interesting in a way that the stories teach us morals and like ethics and all that. So the character has to be that way because at the end it will teach us that not to be that way, right? So my question is like, does personal honor or like isn't it selfish to think that I don't care if something happens, I just have to worry about my personal honor and my I have to keep my word. What do you think about that?
I don't think his choices stem from a point of personal honor. I think his choices came from a point of he's not an individual anymore. I think that's what he completely bought into, was that he's not an individual. He doesn't have the rights of an individual, that he's free to make his own choices. I think through his vow, I think he gave up his freedom of making his own choices. I think he only did what the throne commanded him to do, and he would do that regardless. So in a way, he was not an individual. He didn't have the choice, or I think he never thought he had the choice. I shouldn't say he didn't have the choice. He definitely had the choice, but in his mind, he never had a choice. He only did what he was told to do.
Uh, yeah, yeah. Um, yes, I get it. But I just thought, like, at that point of time, he had greater responsibility than actually. So when he made that vow, that was from an unselfish point of view, because he's giving away everything, right? He's giving away his right to the throne and all that. But then again, at some point of time, people can also construe that as being selfish when he doesn't stop the things that he could have easily or at least attempted to. But again, the funny thing is, he realizes this at the end of his life, and we can talk about it. And so that's where we get the story or the lesson from the story, right? Okay, so this was number two. He could have avoided. Lesson. So next incident is I want to ask you. So this is funny. So being half-hearted, again, being half-hearted in your attempt to keep your vow. So what happens is that when the war comes, he decides, because he's sworn fealty to the throne, he decides to join the so-called bad guys or people in the dark or like Kauravas, and he's appointed their Lord Commander or Commanding General. But then he also ties one hand behind his back or his army's back by again making a promise, or not a promise. He just tells that he's not going to kill any of the Pandavas. He can kill soldiers. He's going to kill foot soldiers, but he'll never kill the main enemy of that side. He's not going to do it because he loves them. He is their great grand uncle and all that. So that kind of handicaps the bad side. So it's kind of, which team are you playing, bro? Kind of a thing, right? You, if you're here, you're leading my army. You have to be full throttle and kill the other side. Now you're gonna say you're not gonna kill the enemy just because and all that. You're just gonna kill soldiers. Like, what use is that to me? So he's technically keeping his vow by fighting for the ruling side or the throne. But again, he also doesn't want to do it wholeheartedly, and that kind of handicaps them.
Yeah, so I guess this is again him making a choice uh, based out of love, because he liked all of his nephews, basically his grandnephews, the Kauravas and Pandavas. They were all his nephews, and he liked them all equally. He didn't actually have a side to choose. The only reason he was fighting on one side was because that was the side on the throne, and that was the side he can fight.
Yeah, he thought that whichever side he was going to fight, like, is a losing war. He's going to lose no matter who wins. Right?
Yeah.
He thought that way, like he's the losing side. He's losing his skin.
So that brings me to this. So I'm sort of recognizing this pattern in the stories where every time he made a conscious choice, like where he made his own choice, they were always driven by very good motives. Like, it was out of love and respect and loyalty. The first time he made the oath, the second time was when, what did he do? He tried to kidnap 3 women. And the third time is basically fighting in a war, but with basically handicapping himself and also saying that he would not kill any of his nephews on the other side. So all those 3 times, his choices, even though the actions might have been bad, the choices where he made came from a good place, I think. But again, when you see it from a different point of view, it can be a really, really bad choice. So again, like going back to the war, I guess he gets a lot of. I think Duryodhana, the leader or the oldest brother of the Kauravas, basically accuses Bheeshma, his grand uncle, of the same thing that he said, of not being completely committed to the war, of still not, because he refuses to kill any of his other cousins. And Bhishma then comes back and I guess he says, like, either I would No, he says he would make Krishna step into the war
Exactly.
and use a weapon. I think that's what he comes back as.
Can
And
you
I
give a
think to give a
context about
context on
Krishna?
why
Why? What's? Can you give a context about Krishna? Like what he made a vow. I think so, right?
he also made a vow.
Yeah. So what is that?
So, so, so Krishna, according to the stories, is basically a reincarnation of Vishnu. So he's literally a god who's reincarnated, and so he's a really powerful being,
Dude.
dude. He's the dude, and he's basically known for his cleverness, cunningness, and his wisdom, among other things. So when this war erupts between the cousins, the Kauravas and the Pandavas, Krishna realizes that the Pandavas were actually not treated fairly and that they were actually on the right, and so he decides to fight for them. But then, him being a god, I guess I don't know who brought it up, but someone raises the question of how is it a fair fight when you have a god on your side? And Krishna comes back to say, to make it even, he says, I would not fight in the war. I'm not going to use a weapon. I'm just going to be the charioteer for Arjuna, who's the greatest warrior on that side. So Krishna basically is in the war, but only as a charioteer. Uh, Even though like it might be seen as doing very little, it was actually a very key role for him to play in the war because he is basically able to talk to the Pandavas, the five brothers, and give them wisdom and advice and a lot of things about life and basically being in this weird situation of having to fight your own cousins for your kingdom. And and so which is why coming back to Bhishma's comeback of making Krishna pick up a weapon in the war would basically mean Krishna breaks his vow, and
I
in
think
many
the
ways
way
it
he puts it,
it invalidates the Pandavas' side of being people who break their oaths.
I think the way he puts it is that either I'm gonna kill Arjuna or I'm gonna make Krishna pick up his weapon. So it's kind
Yeah,
of like he gave it like a binary. And actually, to give a context about why Krishna made that vow, so both the warriors from both the camps, they were choosing who their allies are going to be or who's going to fight side by side. So both of them, Duryodhana and Arjuna, I wouldn't call Arjuna the captain, but the best warrior from either side, or Duryodhana was the captain on this side, or the leader. So they both went to Krishna to get his support before the war started. And then, so Krishna gave a choice. Either you can have me as a charioteer or you can have my army. So he gave that option to Duryodhana. Duryodhana made a foolish decision. He said like, oh, Krishna's army is great. I'll take the army. What use is this guy just being a charioteer? So that's how the story goes. He wasn't far-sighted to recruit Krishna's services. And some theories say or stories say that Krishna knew that he was going to make the wrong decision, Duryodhana. And so again, he made a vow. He just wanted to keep things neutral. He said like, I'm not going to pick up my weapons or like because that would be the end of the war. He would, so that it wouldn't be a fair fight, like you said.
yeah.
Um, so interesting thing happened like so in the war on I don't know which day of the war, Bhishma fights ferociously. He wounds Arjuna. He almost kills Arjuna, and that's when Krishna he says, "Screw it! I'm gonna pick up my weapon and kill this guy. I don't care about my vow." So he
But
took
Krishna
the
doesn't pick up a weapon though.
wheel of the chariot,
He just picks up the wheel of the chariot. Yeah,
and so he was successful in keeping his promise, Bhishma. And Bhishma just folded his hands and said, like, "Yeah, you can kill me," but um, then Arjuna comes to Krishna, said, "I'll take care of it. I'll fight with more determination and all that." So that was the demonstration on how serious you have to be about your own vows. You cannot be that serious. You cannot take yourself too seriously. Krishna was um, he was ready to break his vow because he was looking at the big picture. He didn't care if he stupid vow amounted to anything when it was the stakes were high. He was ready to do that for his best friend or for the good side or for the winning side, but Bhishma didn't do it till the end. So it is kind of a commentary. The story is narrated or structured in a way that the viewer or the reader gets that comparison. right? See, this guy did this guy did that. See, what's the story? What's the lesson for us from that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that was an
and
interesting
what?
point.
So what happens is, so let's go to the end time now. So this guy, so he basically tells the Pandavas or the good side how to kill him. He just gives away the strategy. So he dies. He dies. Not dies. I mean, he's on the deathbed.
Well,
Uh,
before that, I think you have to give the story about Krishna's basically telling them how Bhishma can only be defeated
oh
by
yeah, sorry.
someone,
You get yeah, yeah.
basically a man who was a woman before. And this is where the story
Yeah,
about Amba's rebirth as whatever his name is called,
Shikandi.
Sikhandi?
Shikandi. Yeah, I
Shikhandi.
think he was a man eunuch. Um,
There's versions of
he,
it
he was born as a man, but he still had the memories from the
from his previous life,
previous
basically.
life. He was a woman, so
So I
people
guess
just branded him a eunuch, but I don't know
yeah.
if that's true.
So I guess so they go and find Shikhandi and they bring him to the battlefield and I guess so Arjuna pretty much uses Shikhandi as a shield, as a human shield, and starts firing arrows from behind him. And he shoots like so many arrows through Bhishma's body, like he rips open his armor and he's going to like he starts to uh, he shoots so many arrows through him that literally his whole body is littered through the arrows. And when Bhishma falls back from all of that, again he's not dead because he can only choose how to die when he wants to die. He can choose it, so he's still not dead. So he's got all these. I think it was said like 1,000 arrows on his body, and he literally falls back, and the arrows that are going through his body literally form a bed of arrows on which he's lying, and he's pretty much done. Like he's so close to death, but he can't die until he chooses to die. And I guess when everyone sees Bhishma fall, uh, the war pretty much comes to a stop, or they take a pause in many ways, like on both
Time out.
sides. Yeah, almost like a timeout. And on both sides, they take a pause, and it shows that despite his choices and like the way he lived and the actions he took, good or bad, he had the respect of everyone on that field. Like literally, everyone stopped because this great man was done. Like he was finally defeated. And I think the only words he spoke to Arjuna was uh, his head was hanging low. So Arjuna takes 3 arrows and sticks them up under his head so that his head could be straight. And then he shoots an arrow into the ground, basically. And it is said that the river Ganga, who's Bhishma's mother in many ways, the divine form of the river is his mother. So the river basically rose up in order to quench his thirst. And so basically the water shot up through the ground into his mouth so that he wouldn't be thirsty. And then basically he chooses to die on the field.
Uh, I don't think he stays alive till the end of the war, so he doesn't die, because at the end he gives like a discourse to the new king, the winner Yudhishthira, and that becomes known as the Vishnu Sahasranama, I think so. So it's kind of a
I didn't know.
What's that?
Is that the same thing? I didn't
that's
know
what
that.
read. Yes, he's the one who narrated that to like statecraft, governance, and what to do and all that. He was someone who was very knowledgeable but didn't choose to
Use his
implement
knowledge.
some of that.
Yeah.
So he gave some of that wisdom, like don't repeat the mistakes I did and all that. So one of the interesting things he said to Yudhishthira was, your loyalty should not be to one person or one thing. It should be to the your subjects or people, or like, so you never be attached to your vows, or never be attached to anything so much, because things are fluid, things change, perspectives change. So you have to judge the situation at that point of time, rather than just not have some, I'm a man of principle and all that, but your principle may be irrelevant now, may not amount to much now. You may have to break your principles to do something greater good and all that. So never be attached to some idea that prevents you from doing anything that ought to be done, right? So he gives a lot of advice to Yudhishthira, like don't repeat the mistakes I did. I could have stopped all this, but I didn't. So he gives a very good definition of dharma. He said it's a balance, it's a delicate balance. You can call that as, I draw analogy to what should be the freedom of expression, right? In the modern world, he said it should be the fine balance between uh, your duties and someone else's rights. It should be a fine balance, or it could be either way. My rights should not come in between someone doing his sworn duty or something. So that he calls it a santulan. He calls it a balance. Doesn't mean it can. Of course, there can be overlaps. That can be all that, but it has to work in tandem. So you cannot be an absolutist in exercising your rights, that it prevents so many people from doing their own, like from fulfilling their responsibility to their families or all that, to themselves, or doing their duties. So it's like you can't flaunt your rights to a cop. Of course, you can't do it because you're going interfering in his work. But that's again with two people. Like, you cannot exercise your rights to an extreme that it infringes on other people's responsibilities or duties they have to other things and their rights. They have a right to fulfill their duties, right? So he gives a. This was thousands of years back. See, that is, it's a balance. It's fluid. It's not black and white. He was against the absolutism of rights, duties, or it has to be a balance, because anything you do, like you said a while back, affects someone else. So you can't be uh, you can't be really rigid about it and be selfish about it.
So I guess in many ways his advice comes from a point of experience. Like, he lived the complete opposite way to what he preached at the end, basically. Or in many ways, I guess he learned through his life what the right thing to do was. And yeah, too little, too late, I guess. But regardless,
For him personally,
regardless, he was, I think he still had the respect of everyone else around him because of, I guess, just how trustworthy, or how much of a man of his word he was. And I guess even though he had the respect of the entire world, he was not happy, I think, about his own life at the end of the day. Like, he gave up so much to make other people happy, and he got all that love and respect from everyone else. But I don't think he ever was happy in his own life, or he ever had the chance to be happy in his own life. And I think that's a very, how did I think of it? His life story is actually really, really tragic. Like, from his perspective, he had a really, really, pretty much a cursed life. But yeah, so like that's
so
a weird
So,
conundrum.
for someone who doesn't have the context, they might think that we were talking about all his mistakes of this guy, but yet we call him a great guy because we didn't choose to talk about all the good things he did or all the positives about him. We didn't go in detail about it.
Yeah,
We were just critiquing his oath, vow, and the decisions he took that were wrong in our opinion, or we just judged it. We were just being judgmental about him and his I wouldn't say negative side, the questionable decisions he took and all that, but we didn't choose to talk about his good side purposely. But so it kind of justifies why we call him a great man anyway. And he's a complicated character, a tragic character. So it's again a story. We are discussing story, and again, so he lived his life that way. So now for any reader, it gives them lesson in what not to be like and what to be, and so that's, I think, some a very good thing to learn from a story. You follow a character and you identify what he did wrong, what he did right. It's like living through. So teaching someone good and bad, or like this is the way to go, that's the way to go. Instead of that, if you just narrate a story like this, people can see through that. People can see that what they learn from it, they can derive from it. I think that's all I had from my side regarding Bhishma.
yeah. So I guess to conclude, like just adding to what you said, I think this, at least Bhishma story, is a great way of talking about good and bad to kids, I guess, like, because it's a story, so it's a story you narrate, and it's a fairy tale basically, and then you say, oh, so this is good and this is bad. But then I think for someone like us, like over the years, you've grown up and you realize good and bad are not absolutes. Like as you said, there are no absolutes. Good is a spectrum and bad is a spectrum, and you might think you're doing good and it could be really bad for someone else, and you might think that you're doing something bad, but it's actually ending up helping a lot of other people. So I guess good and bad is a very subjective, and it's different from each person's point of view and from their experience and whatever lens they're looking at it from. So I guess, and I think this goes throughout the entire Mahabharata. Like every other character out there is somewhere else on the spectrum. They all fall in different points of the spectrum, and I guess it makes it all the more interesting when they're interacting with each other, because there is no absolute good and absolute bad in the story. Even the people who we've traditionally grown up listening to as the bad people had a lot of good qualities about them and did a lot of good things, which we rarely talk about because they're bad people. But
Yep, exactly.
that's the spectrum I think we need to be uh, conscious about, and I think that's even true today. Like when we talk about people on the news, and we are very quick to judge someone as good and bad, as you mentioned before, and also just because someone is good doesn't mean everything they do is has to be good. A good person can do really bad things, can make mistakes, can be wrong, can be a lot of things, and similarly, a bad person can do good things too. But that doesn't change their overall goodness or badness, I guess. I guess it overall comes down to the cumulative good or bad that you did for the greater amount of people, right?
Even, even that good and bad is subjective, right? So
Yeah,
yeah, it's a great discussion. Like to when you get into that topic, like what is good, what is bad. How do you measure goodness and badness? Is it the number of people it affects, or the is it the or is it how it affects? So that could be an interesting topic someday for discussion.
it's going to come back
Definitely.
up again and again every time we talk about another story or another character, basically, from the story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. So this has been really interesting. Um, I guess we'll see you all again with another video soon.
Exactly. Yeah, it was nice talking to you, Nikhil, and yeah, we'll be back with one more video, more videos.
More
Back.
videos. Yeah. See ya.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.